Добрый день, дорогие слушатели, зрители.
Good afternoon, dear friends, dear listeners, dear viewers. Today we have a master class on Selkup language, and it will be conducted by Interethnic Association Ilsat or Soul from Tomsk, Grigory Korotkikh. He will tell you about the current situation in the regions of Russian and the initiatives in support of the Selkup language. Grigory, the floor is yours. Hello, everybody. My name is Grigory Viktorovich Korotkikh, and I'm a teacher of Selkup language and director of Interethnic Association Ilsat, which can be translated as vitality or soul from Selkup language. So, for the beginning, who are Selkups? Selkups is one of the 40 minor nationalities, ethnic groups of West Siberia. They live in West Siberia, West Siberian plainland, in Tomsk region. It is where I am now, Krasnoyarsky region, and Yamalo-Nenets autonomous region. Traditionally, Selkups eat fish, so they catch fish, hunting, and also gathering of fruits and vegetables and berries. All over the world, there are about 4,000 Selkups living in different places. About 1,800 live in Tomsk region, about the same in Yamalo-Nenets autonomous region, and about 400 in Krasnoyarsky Krai, which is adjacent to Yamalo-Nenets region. Linguistically, Selkups are part of the Ural family of the language, and it has two groups. These are Finno-Ugric and Samadi. Finno-Ugric languages are such as Finnish, Estonian, Hungarian, Marian, Khanty, and many others. Samadi language is Nenets. So there is one is for tundra, another is for the forest. Selkup language. There are there are several dialects, but basically there are two Selkup dialects, northern and southern, and Nganasansky is also in Taimyr, is also part of Samadisky group, and Sayan, Kamasinsky, Kambaysky, Matorsky, Taigi, Karagas, and Sayot. Basically, to the very best, these languages have about maximum several hundred lexical units. So these are dying languages, but it is noteworthy to mention that the nearest relative to of Selkup languages is Kamasinsky. Kamasinsky, we can no longer consider it as a dead language because for more than a year it is being used by activists, by language activists. On this map, you can see the geographical distribution of Samadin languages, and you can see a distribution of the peoples and groups who are speaking these languages. Nenets, Enets, Nganasan, and Selkups. As you can see, Selkup territory is not uniform. There is a northern part and there is a southern part. As I mentioned before, where we were discussing the number of Selkups. There are about 1,800 people in Tomsk region and 1,800 in Yamal. So there are two separate and geographically not adjacent territories. So there are northern and southern Selkups, which are divided geographically. And this naturally reflected on their language. The two photographs on the top, these are the Tomsk region in the south, and in the lower part, you can see the northern Selkups in Yamal-Nenetsk region. So we have figured out where Selkups are among other peoples, but Selkups are divided not only into the northern and southern. Selkup language is not a homogeneous phenomenon. Before the 17th century, all Selkups lived in the middle Obo river. This is modern Tomsk region and the nearby territories. But after the expansion of the Russians and Khanty to this territory, some of the Selkups resettled to the north. It happened about 300 years ago. And since then, the Selkup language, which was rich in dialects, it became even more characterized by this variety. There are two dialect regions. They are divided into subdialects. In the North Selkup language, there are about 600 people speaking this. Maybe I'm too optimistic saying that there are 600 people speaking North Selkup language. The biggest is Tazovsky, Taz. This is the biggest group of people who speak, the biggest group of people speaking Selkup language. Close to this is Turukhan and Yelagui dialects. They are not dead yet, these dialects, and we believe that one or two persons can speak this dialect to this or that extent. They're colored as in the same color because they're a close group linguistically. Among the North Selkup dialects, there were two small groups, Karasin and Vakhov. They extended, and they were about a few dozen people, and they are no more in use since 1930s. In the south of Selkup area, there are more dialects, and you can see in the number, in the color, there are 4 dialect groups. The dialect groups that belong to one group, they are geographically close to each other, and they are also lexically, phonetically, and grammatically close to each other, and people understand each other. The farther the dialects are geographically from each other, the less they can understand each other. So the mutual understanding between the South and the North is almost impossible. There are 4 dialect groups in the South, and all these dialects have probably extincted. And we see that up to 10 people can use this language. One dialect group, this is Narim group, Vasyugan and Tomsk. Then intermediary is Sheshkup dialect. And then there is a big dialect group is ket, verh, upper ob, and chain. And a little bit separate is Chulim dialect. They are distributed along the rivers. This is the cloud of tags, and it shows the variety of the languages. It is, in fact, difficult to discuss Selkup in general and their language, because when we say that Selkup have this or that, or the Selkup language has this peculiarity, we have to clarify in what Selkup language, in what of the languages of the Selkup group do you have this peculiarity? Okay, now about linguistic peculiarities. Without the possibility of using the pronouncing this, the basic phonetics of the Selkup language. First of all, there are sonants, like that you can hear them. They do not soften the adjacent consonant. I don't know to what extent this will be understandable for the European audience. So in the Russian language, we have palatalization. So the sonants that are studying, the modern students learning the language, tend to palatalize these sonants. So these sonants are not palatalizing the consonants. And this is the difference from the Russian language. This is quite common for other languages of the world. Among other things that are interesting and quite simple, the neutral sonant, schwa, exists in all positions. It can be short and not stressed, short and stressed, long and non-stressed, unstressed, and long and unstressed. I think it's very beautiful. Also, there are also consonants like this, which makes Selkup language, the sound is quite harsh. Quite often I heard the opinions about how the Selkup speech is perceived by other people. And the older generation of Hante say that our language is very soft. Selkup language is very harsh. It's has a lot of explosive sounds.
Также я упоминал.
There are also I have already mentioned that there is a great dialect variety, and quite often the dialects phonetically correspond to each other, which is a subject or can be a subject of separate research. And also in Selkup language, historically, the intonation is very even, with lowering of the voice by the end of the phrase. This is not like it is in the Russian language and the major European languages, but it is similar to many Turkic languages. This also produces an effect that impresses the unprepared ear, unprepared listener. A few words about the grammar. This is agglutinative languages, as all Samadian languages. The grammar categories are expressed in suffixes, and each suffix is responsible for each particular additional meaning, and there is no grammar gender, and it is a very interesting system of verbal tenses, which is poorly investigated yet. It is very difficult to define the time, the tense in the grammar sense. Of course, the researchers are trying to investigate this, and in modern research and in the previous researches, what we can see, that we can make a cautious conclusion that such categories as tense, gender, and inclination do not have exact borders between themselves. And it is not always easy to see the semantics of particular morpheme, which express a particular option. This the future tense is also related to certain inclinations. I will do something, or I want to do something, and this relates to the necessity of doing this. So there is a certain flavor of modality here. Even the present tense is not as simple. In the present tense, there is such a grammar category as narrative. It is a particular suffix. Sometimes it is even called narrative suffix. It is present tense when you describing the actions of some other persons, or you want to put yourself aside from the events taking place in the present tense, in the present time. So Selkup language, to sum it up, has a lot of expressive means for tenses. Now about syntaxes. Basic order. First there is a subject, object, and then there is a verb to express simultaneous actions. We have special constructions, the simultaneous actions constructions. Now let's talk about writing. On this slide, you can see quite a number of alphabets. And believe me, these are not all the alphabets we have in Selkup language. Creation and functioning of a uniform Selkup literally norm is simply impossible because different dialects do not understand each other. And as I said before, there are not one Selkup language, there are two of them, Northern and Southern. And different books have different methods of writing. On your left, you can see Southern Selkup. This in the center, this is the alphabet taken from Selkup, from the textbook of Selkups in Yamalo-Nenets region. On the top is the Tomsk region. This small insert, it's exactly the same dialect, but in different books, they use different alphabets. And this is the alphabet for people living along the river Ket. So, as it is difficult to describe a uniform Selkup language, same applies to the Selkup alphabet. Now about the research. We not always had this situation. How did the writing of Selkup language appear? First of all, there were religious books. There were translations of various biblical texts, as well as the ABC with the folklore stories. Four books at the end of the 18th century were written by Nikolai Grigorovsky. He was a forester. And then for some misdemeanor, he was exiled to Tomsk region, and he became the first researcher of Selkup language. And he was the first language activist as well. So this is 19th century. In 1900, there was one more book published, which is called Talks About Genuine God and Genuine Belief. It was written by Bishop Makary Nevs of Neva River. And unfortunately, these books were not widespread among Selkups themselves. They were written and published, but out of the historical materials that we can rely upon, we can make a conclusion that Selkups themselves did not use these books. So this was the situation before the revolution. In 1930s and 1940s, under the Soviet Union, as everywhere all over the country, Selkups were involved in the process of creating their writing for the language. But if before the revolution the books were published in the language of the southern Selkups in 1930s and 1940s, the writing and the books were published only for northern Selkups, for Yamalo-Nenetsk region. Before it was called Yamalo-Nenetsk National Region. Now it is called Yamalo-Nenetsk Autonomous Region. And the territory of southern Selkups were not included in any official regions. So until the collapse of the Soviet Union, the southern Selkups were in the periphery of the Soviet language policy. Meanwhile, writing and books were created for northern Selkups. Since the end of 1980s till now, we see that the process of educational literature was revived. Since 1993, the textbooks were published for southern Selkups in Tomsk region as well. And step by step, various books, textbooks, and dictionaries were published, and they're being published right now in Tomsk and in Yamal. And finally, starting from 2010, we have another source of Selkup language. These are the folklore texts, collection of folklore texts, as well as the texts written by authors by writers. The texts were written by authors in Selkup language, but this is quite a rare situation. But they were mostly collections of works translations from Russian into Selkup language. Each of the provisions that you have on this slide have just a few, maybe dozens of units of books. The entire literature of Selkup language does not exist 50 different books. Now let's discuss the spheres of usage of the language, where the language is being used. In addition to that, the books that we have already mentioned. First of all, it's everyday use. And of course, it served basis for ethnic culture and the religious sphere of life. There were epic poems, mythology, for instance, mythology about creation of the world, and of course the songs. And there was a whole layer of culture that existed in Selkup language, shamanism and traditional traditional everyday life was also based on Selkup language. So this was the situation of the language shift since 1930s till the end of the 20th century. It all disappeared. One more interesting thing. Previously, Selkup language was used as language of interethnic communications for taiga regions of Western Siberia. It means that all peoples who surrounded Selkups, that's Kets, Huns, Evenks, and Turks, were speaking between themselves in Selkup language. Selkup language was a language of interethnic communication. It was lingua franca for the peoples of West Siberia. Three languages situation. Selkup, Ket, and Evenki language was preserved till 2000. The last representatives of Selkups and Kets who knew not only their ethnic language, but also the Selkup language, died in the early 2000s. So the peoples of West Siberia were quite polylinguistic, polylingual. What I have mentioned probably can be treated as the past. If we talk about this Selkup South, the Tomsk region, Selkup language is not used in everyday life, maybe, and of course, the Russian language is used for interethnic communications, maybe to some extent in the cultural. So in the north, Selkup North, Yamalo-Nenetsk region, the language is a subject at schools and kindergartens. So all stages, all levels of education, Selkup language is being taught. Even in kindergarten schools and higher education. Higher education, this is an institute for the peoples of the North. Question is, what is the quality of education? But we must state that in North Selkup language is being taught at all levels. There is also one TV show and one radio, and there is a podcast on the radio and in social network called ВКонтакте, and of course in North Selkup language we have ethnic cultural events, various holidays and celebrations, festivals, and also cultural establishment. And in the North, the language still serves the purpose of a traditional economy and traditional culture, not the culture which is used for staging. In South Selkup language, there are much less number of active users, and the language is not as used as in the North. It is not present in the system of education. In 1990s and 2000, the Selkup language was taught in one school and one higher educational establishment. It all stopped by the year 2005 and 2007. At present, in Tomsk region, Selkup language is used only as hobby groups or private personal tuition, personal classes. Also, Selkups in Tomsk region develop actively internet resources, actively in comparison to other languages of the corresponding scope. There are new videos being made, short texts and blogs in South Selkup language. And this is, of course, done by native speakers and language activists. In the Tomsk region, we actively publish books in Selkup language. Of recent years, I think 5 or 7 pieces of literature were published, which is quite impressive for such a narrow group of readers. Also in the Tomsk region, the language is used for ethnic culture, but it is not used for the traditional economy like hunting and fishing. But here we can make a little notice that in the Tomsk region, and when we are talking about Selkup language within the Tomsk region and its usage, this is probably all the events, festivals, and meetings that are being conducted and held in the cultural establishments. Here's a question mark in connection to what I have said. If at present Selkup language occupies the following spheres of applications, how can this situation be improved or even preserved at present position? It's a big question. Why? Because many actions, many activities that are recognized as support of Selkup language and of other languages of peoples of the North, this hobby groups and teaching in school is going on for years and years, alongside with the really publication of books and festivals. But these measures do not do not secure the transfer of the language. So here's a question to all the spheres of the language application. As all of them, this way or another, exist with the external support and the initiative. In this connection, we come to a conclusion that preservation of the language is based on the skills of the people. So we have come to a situation when the people who know the language sufficiently enough have to transfer this knowledge to the new native speakers, and further on and further on. I have not mentioned, but I will do that we have come to a situation, just because the Selkup language is not transferred in families. I mentioned the language shift. This is the process when the language goes beyond the family framework. In 3, 4, 5 maximum generations, the ethnic language is being lost and replaced by the language of ethnic majority. So the language is not being used in the families, and the question mark refers to the idea that the language needs to be transferred as a skill. In our interethnic union in Ilsat, or vitality, or soul, as we remember, so there is crafts, of course, and I work on supporting the language skills. So this is our masterclass or workshop. Thank you for your attention. Now we may have a short discussion. Thank you, Grigory, for your very informative introduction to the Selkup language. And we have several questions related to what you said. If we start dividing Selkup languages into North and South, but what is in the self-identification, especially in the North Selkup? Do they feel that they're the same people as the South Selkup? Maybe there are some subnames. I will go a little bit back. Selkups are divided into northern and southern. It happened about 300 years ago, maybe more. These two groups, after this division, for hundreds of years, did not even know anything about themselves, each other. Now, in the times of the internet, and well, the mass communications came to our lives already in the 20th century. So only at the end of the 20th century, the northern Selkups opened southern Selkups for themselves, and vice versa. At present, those Selkups who know about the existence of various groups, the Selkups of the other group, Selkups northern for southern and southern for northern, are part of their self-identification, but not everybody knows about it. Are there some sub-ethnonyms? Yes, of course they are. And here we have different colors. There is a great number of opinions on dialect classification of Selkup language. I stick to the one that is based on the geographical principle, as you can see, north and south, and then on the principle of self-naming. And the dialects that are colored differently have this the same self-name. So North Selkup call themselves Sökumat. These dialects call themselves Chumagoma, and Narim dialect is used among other dialects, most used in Tomsk region. Shoshkups are Shoshkups. The next in red group of dialects had a different name. Shulin called themselves also differently. And here we can see a great number of various self-names, local self-names, self-naming. Thank you for your exhaustive answer. Now about the contacts of South Selkup with Vasyugansky and or Tomsk languages. Do they influence each other, or maybe there are some commonalities among them? Of course, there are lexical borrowings in the dialects that were in contact with other languages. Vasyugan dialect was in contact with Vasyugan Khanty language. Tomsk contacted with Alexandrov dialect, and of course they borrowed a certain number of words from each other. For instance, quite a number of these borrowings describe cultural realities. For instance, the names of musical instruments. Even the word miracle was borrowed from the Khanty language. If we move to the other side of South Selkup area, where they contacted the Turkic languages, the borrowings were much more numerous and more than from Khanty language, and a lot of these borrowings exist in the contact dialects that contacted the Turks, that the lower part of this list. In these dialects, there were a lot of borrowings from everyday life. For instance, cow as an animal, to stay, you need be. All these notions were borrowed from the Turkic languages. So, need be, надо, нужно are the Turkic language borrowings, not the borrowings from the Russian. Now about the language of interethnic communications. What are the arguments in favor of Selkup language, not Evenki language? Selkup and Evenks have different types of economy. Evenks are, they are nomads with tiers. Selkups live in settlements. In Middle Ages Siberia, Selkups occupied quite strong positions because for several centuries they were between several fires. Between the two fires, from the north, they bordered with Khanty, who wanted to get up to Ob and to live in the south, which is warmer, where it is easier to run agriculture. And from the south, they bordered with the Turks, who were more interested in, of course, they were nomads and cattle breeding, but they were wanted to expand to the forest area. So before the Russians, a lot of territories were received the elements of Turkic culture. So the Selkups had to balance between the two big neighbors, and they formed established themselves as quite a significant force, significant and influential group. So if we talk about nomads and settlements, yes, it is clear. But what about base toponyms? For instance, is there something like origin names of Amur, Birobidzhan? If none, maybe there are some local toponyms that are geographical names. Narim as a Russian settlement. It was 1595, the year of establishment, and as the researchers believe, it was built on the place of the Selkup center. Narim is it is not generally recognized point of view, but Narim origins from Selkup word nyar, which means swamp. And the city of Tomsk and the Tom River. According to one of the versions, Tom is a Selkup toponym, which means upper part of the river. Of course, we can have a lot of discussions around these names for a number of reasons, and based on various historical sources, we may have an opinion that river Tom is the upper part of the river, and geographically this is so. When was the highest number of the population, if we talk about South Selkup? When was the peak of in numbers? It is hard to say, because if we take most recent years, according to the census of 2002, it was 1,800 Selkups in Tomsk region. In 10 years, in 1/3 of the people was lost by the year 2010. Of course, they did not die, but it's simply self-recognition, self-identification of people disappeared. So it is not really a good idea to start counting all the Selkups, because what are the criteria? If we go deep into the generations, we can probably go to get more than 2,000 people of Selkups. But if we go to the census data, the story will be totally different. Now, about the native speakers of Selkup language, 100% of Selkups were speaking Selkup language before 1930s, as well as the number of the people of Selkup Selkup people as well as other peoples of the north is quite stable. In the 19th century, in this territory, there were about the same number as it is now. If we take this, not mixed marriages, but third and fourth generation of Selkup origin. Selkups were never too many because the natural conditions are quite harsh.
Спасибо большое, Григорий. Спасибо за все ответы, за то, что...
Thank you, Grigory. Thank you for your discussion, your answers. We wish you all possible success to your collective, to your organization, and supporting and promoting the Selkup language. And I thank you for the invitation. Thank you. All the best.